Look at her, acting classy. She sold the house for turkey money, so don't be surprised she can't afford a real seat.
My son seated me next to the trash can at Thanksgiving dinner. Not by accident. The dining room table had 8 chairs, and I got the 9th, a folding chair wedged between the kitchen island and the garbage bin. My son David stood at the head of the table, carving turkey, and announced to our entire family that I was perfect for that spot. "Mom basically sold the house for turkey money anyway," he said, waving the carving knife toward me. "She's been burning through cash so fast, we figured she'd feel right at home, next to where money goes to die." The cousins snickered. My sister looked down. David's wife, Jennifer, covered her mouth, shoulders shaking with laughter. Even my grandchildren, kids I'd helped raise, kids whose college funds I'd contributed to, they were smiling, not with love. The kind of smile you give when someone gets what they deserve. I sat down in that folding chair. I placed my napkin on my lap. I looked around the table at faces I'd known my entire adult life. People who'd eaten at my table, slept in my guest rooms, borrowed money they never paid back. Everyone laughed like it was rehearsed. If you've ever sat at your own family's table and felt like a stranger, if you've ever wondered when caring became weakness, stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to my channel and write in the comments where are you watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are traveling, but let me back up 3 years to when this all started. My husband Robert had just died. Sudden heart attack in the driveway while getting the morning paper. One day we were planning our retirement trips. The next day I was a 70-year-old widow, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. David showed up 2 days after the funeral with manila folders and what he called the plan. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Robert and I had shared 43 years of morning coffee, and spread out papers like he was conducting business. "Mom, you can't handle all this alone," he said, tapping his pen against a checklist he'd apparently prepared. "Dad took care of the financial stuff, right? You don't even know what counts you have, what bills need paying. I'm going to help you get organized." He wasn't wrong. Robert had managed our investments, our taxes, our insurance policies. I knew we were comfortable, more than comfortable, but I'd let him handle the details while I focused on my part-time work at the library and the volunteer projects that kept me busy. It seemed like a reasonable division of labor at the time. I trusted my husband completely. The mistake was thinking I could trust my son the same way. David started small. He offered to help me understand the bank statements, to organize the filing cabinet, to make sure bills got paid on time. He was patient and gentle, explaining things in a way that didn't make me feel stupid. For the first few months, I was genuinely grateful. He'd stop by twice a week, kiss my forehead, and handle whatever financial crisis I thought I was having. When the insurance company sent confusing letters about Robert's life insurance payout, David translated everything into simple language. When tax season arrived, he connected me with an accountant and made sure all the forms were filed correctly. I should have seen it wasn't help, but somewhere around month 6, the helping started feeling different. David began suggesting that I add his name to my checking account. Just for emergencies, he said. Just so he could help if I ever got confused or forgot to pay something important. He talked about how his friend's mother had accidentally paid her electric bill 3 times in 1 month because she couldn't remember if she'd already sent the check. "You don't want that happening to you, right, Mom?" he said. "I just want to make sure you're protected." I said yes. It seemed logical. I was still learning how to live alone, still figuring out which bills came when and which bank statements meant what. Having backup felt smart, not surrender. That's when the first red flag appeared, though I didn't recognize it until much later. I was sitting at my kitchen table one Tuesday morning, drinking coffee and waiting for the mail. It was a ritual I'd developed since Robert died. Coffee at 9, mail at 10:30, then a walk before lunch. Simple routines helped fill the enormous quiet. But that Tuesday, and every Tuesday after, the mail carrier walked past my box without stopping. No bank statements, no bills, no insurance correspondence. Nothing except grocery store flyers and donation requests from charities I'd never heard of. I called the post office thinking maybe there was a delivery problem. "Ma'am, your mail is being forwarded to another address," the postal worker told me. "Someone submitted a change of address form about 6 weeks ago." The bank statements stopped coming to my mailbox. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, staring at my empty kitchen table. I hadn't submitted any change of address form. I'd lived in this house for 22 years. Why would I forward my mail somewhere else? I called David. "Oh, that," he said when I explained what happened. "I set up a temporary forwarding system so I could help you stay organized. Your mail comes to my house first. I sort through everything, handle the junk, and then bring you whatever's actually important. It's more efficient this way." But I didn't know. "Mom, you're getting overwhelmed trying to manage everything yourself. Remember last month when you called me crying because you couldn't find that Medicare letter? This way, nothing gets lost. I'm filtering out the stress for you." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that Medicare letter wasn't lost, just misfiled, and that I was perfectly capable of sorting my own mail. But he was speaking so patiently, so reasonably. And maybe he was right. Maybe I was getting overwhelmed. Maybe I had been crying about that Medicare letter. Maybe this was what good sons did for mothers who were struggling to adjust. Maybe he was right about my confusion. But the mail forwarding was just the beginning. Over the next year, David's involvement in my finances grew from helpful suggestions to firm requirements. He convinced me that I was too emotional to make big decisions so soon after losing Robert. When I mentioned wanting to donate money to the library's renovation fund, a cause Robert and I had discussed extensively before his death, David launched into a 20-minute explanation of why that was financially irresponsible. "You can't afford to give money away right now," he said. "You don't understand the full picture of your expenses. Trust me, I've been tracking everything. You're spending more than you realize." I wasn't spending more than I realized. I was spending less than I had in years. My routine was coffee at home, groceries weekly, and occasional dinner with my sister. I hadn't taken a vacation, bought new furniture, or made any major purchases since Robert died. If anything, my expenses had dropped significantly because I was barely leaving the house. But David had spreadsheets. He had charts showing my monthly spending patterns. Graphs that demonstrated why my current lifestyle was unsustainable, and projections that suggested I'd run out of money within 5 years if I didn't make serious changes. The numbers looked official and frightening. When I tried to ask questions about specific line items, he'd sigh and explain that I was focusing on details instead of seeing the big picture. "This is exactly what I was worried about," he'd say. "You're getting confused by all the paperwork. That's why it's better if you just let me handle the financial planning." Gradually, I stopped asking questions. It was easier to let David manage whatever needed managing than to endure those long conversations where I always ended up feeling stupid and overwhelmed. He set up automatic payments for my utilities, took over communication with my bank, and started receiving paper copies of everything that used to come to my house. When I needed money for groceries or personal expenses, I had to call him, and he'd transfer funds into a separate checking account he'd opened for my convenience. every important letter went somewhere I couldn't see. That system worked perfectly for David for almost 2 years. By Thanksgiving 2024, I was completely cut off from my own financial information. I got a weekly allowance, enough for groceries and small expenses, but nothing substantial. David assured me this was temporary, just until I got back on my feet emotionally. The irony was that I felt more emotionally stable than I had since Robert's death. The sharp grief had softened into a manageable sadness. I was sleeping through the night again, eating regular meals, and finding small joys in my daily routines. I'd even started thinking about rejoining the library's volunteer program, or maybe taking the watercolor class at the community center that my neighbor kept recommending. But David saw something different. According to him, I was getting worse, not better. I was more scattered, more forgetful, more dependent. When I asked for documentation about my financial situation, just basic information about how much money I had and where it was invested, he'd shake his head with that patient, concerned expression that made me feel like I was asking for something unreasonable. "Mom, you're obsessing over numbers again," he'd say. "That's exactly the kind of stress we're trying to avoid. Trust me, everything is handled. You don't need to worry about any of this." But I wasn't obsessing. I was asking simple questions that any adult should be able to ask about their own finances. How much money do I have? Which bank is it in? Do I still own my house outright, or is there a mortgage now? Normal questions that David treated like symptoms of mental decline. The Thanksgiving invitation came with special instructions. Jennifer called me personally, which was unusual since David typically handled all communication between us. "Margaret, we're so excited to have you for dinner this year," she said, artificially bright. "We're doing assigned seating because we have so many people coming, and we want everyone to have the perfect spot." Assigned seating. In 30 years of family Thanksgiving dinners, we'd never had assigned seating. People sat where they wanted, kids at the small table, latecomers squeezed in anywhere. It was casual and warm, but this year was different. Jennifer explained she'd been working with an event planning book about creating memorable holiday experiences. She'd made place cards, planned conversation starters, coordinated serving dishes to match her fall color palette. "I put a lot of thought into where everyone should sit," she said. "David and I talked about it for hours. We want to make sure you're comfortable and included." The trash can placement was too deliberate. I arrived at 3 o'clock, carrying the assigned green bean casserole. Their dining room looked like a magazine photo shoot. Wedding china, perfect napkin triangles, professional centerpiece. Place cards marked each spot in Jennifer's calligraphy. My name was by the kitchen island, at a folding chair between the serving area and garbage bin. Not at the main table, not even at a secondary table, my own separate spot, close enough to hear, but clearly not part of the conversation. "Oh, perfect, Mom's here," David announced when he saw me standing there with the casserole. "Jennifer, did you show her where she's sitting?" We found the ideal place for her, close to the action, but not overwhelming. Jennifer appeared with a bright smile and guided me to the folding chair like she was showing me to a luxury suite. "We thought you'd love this spot," she said. "You can see everything that's happening, and you're right next to the kitchen in case you need anything. Plus, David said you sometimes get tired during long dinners, so if you need to step away, you're perfectly positioned." I never got tired during long dinners. I had never once asked to step away from a family gathering because I was tired. But apparently, this was now part of my official character description. An elderly woman who needed special accommodations and couldn't handle the full experience of sitting at the actual table with actual family members. Other guests arrived over the next hour, my sister Carol and her husband. David's college roommate and wife, two couples who were Jennifer's work friends, David's kids from his first marriage, now in their 20s. Everyone was seated at the main table. Everyone except me. When David carved the turkey and began his speech, I understood that this hadn't been poor planning or thoughtless logistics. This was performance art, and I was the unwilling star. He stood at the head of the table, carving knife in hand, and began what sounded like a prepared monologue about gratitude and family responsibility. He talked about how challenging the last few years had been, how difficult it was to watch someone you love struggle with aging and loss. He spoke about sacrifice and difficult decisions and the burden of caring for a parent who couldn't care for herself. Some people don't understand the financial strain, he said, slicing through the turkey with practiced precision. When someone burns through money like there's no tomorrow, eventually the family has to step in. We've all made sacrifices to make sure Mom stays comfortable. Then came the line that I knew I'd remember for the rest of my life. Mom basically sold the house for turkey money anyway. She's been burning through cash so fast, we figured she'd feel right at home next to where money goes to die. The cousins looked away when he said it. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but I kept my expression neutral. I had not sold my house. I had not burned through cash. I had no idea what David was referring to, but I knew with absolute certainty that whatever financial story he was telling, it wasn't true. The problem was that everyone else at the table believed him. They had no reason not to. David was successful, articulate, and convincing. I was a 72-year-old widow who apparently needed assigned seating at family dinners. Carol, my own sister, couldn't meet my eyes. Jennifer's work friends murmured sympathetically about how hard it must be for David to deal with such a difficult situation. The college roommate nodded knowingly, like he'd seen this exact scenario play out with his own aging parents. Even my sister wouldn't meet my eyes. But the worst part wasn't the strangers who believed David's story. The worst part was watching my grandchildren. Kids I'd babysat, kids I'd taught to ride bicycles, kids whose birthday parties I'd attended religiously for 20 years. Watching them nod along like David's version of events made perfect sense. Like Grandma Margaret really was the financially irresponsible burden he was describing. No one defended me. No one asked questions. No one suggested that maybe there was more to the story than David's carefully crafted narrative. They just accepted that this was who I was now, a confused old woman who needed to be managed and contained and seated next to the trash can for everyone's convenience. I sat through the entire dinner. I ate Jennifer's perfectly prepared turkey and complimented her on the stuffing recipe. I participated in the conversations that were directed toward me and stayed quiet when the adults at the real table discussed topics that apparently didn't concern me. I helped clear dishes and offered to load the dishwasher, though Jennifer insisted I should rest, because cleaning up would be too much for me. When I got home that night, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, still wearing my good dress and thinking about everything that had just happened. The calculated seating arrangement, the performance David had put on, the way everyone had played their assigned roles in his little drama. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I called my cousin Linda. Linda was Robert's cousin, 4 years younger than me, but we'd stayed close after her divorce. She was an estate planning attorney with her own practice downtown, sharp legal mind, 2 kids raised alone, had helped family through financial crises before. I hadn't spoken to her since Robert's funeral, not because we weren't close, but because David had systematically discouraged contact with anyone who might ask complicated questions about my finances. Whenever I mentioned wanting to call Linda or meet her for lunch, David would remind me how busy she was. how I didn't want to burden her with my problems, how she'd probably feel obligated to help, even though she had her own practice to manage. But that Saturday morning, sitting in my kitchen with my coffee and thinking about the previous night's humiliation, I realized I didn't care about David's opinions anymore. I needed answers, and Linda was the one person I knew who could help me find them. Her assistant answered on the second ring. "Linda Chen's office, this is Maria." "Hi, this is Margaret Reynolds. I'm Linda's cousin. Is there any way I could speak with her today? It's somewhat urgent." There was a brief pause, then music as I was put on hold. Within 30 seconds, Linda's voice came through the phone, warm and concerned. "Margaret? Oh my God, it's been too long. Are you okay? Maria said it was urgent." I hadn't planned what I was going to say. I'd expected to leave a message, maybe schedule a meeting for the following week. Having Linda actually on the phone caught me off guard, and suddenly I found myself trying not to cry. "Linda, I need help," I said. "David has been controlling my finances for 2 years. I don't have access to my bank accounts or mail anymore. Yesterday, he told everyone at Thanksgiving that I sold my house for turkey money, but I never sold my house. Something isn't right." The silence lasted long enough that I worried I'd lost the connection. "How long has this been going on?" Linda asked, her voice shifting to professional mode. "Since Robert died. David said he was helping me get organized, but now I can't access anything." "Do you have any financial documents in your possession? Bank statements, investment records, the deed to your house, anything at all?" "I think so. I have a safety deposit box that David doesn't know about. Robert and I opened it years ago, and I kept copies of important papers there. I haven't checked it since he died, but it should still have the original deed, insurance policies, maybe some old bank statements." "Good. That's very good." Linda's voice became crisp and focused. "Margaret, I want you to listen to me carefully. Don't mention this conversation to David or anyone else in the family. Don't let on that you're questioning anything. Can you get to the bank and check that safety deposit box this week?" "Yes, I think so. David usually comes by on Wednesdays, but other days I'm free." "Perfect. Go Monday or Tuesday. Bring everything you have. Copy whatever's in that box and bring the copies to my office. Also, I need you to think hard about this. Has David ever asked you to sign any papers? Loan documents, real estate transfers, power of attorney forms, anything like that?" I thought back over the last 2 years, trying to remember specific instances when David had presented me with paperwork to sign. There had been so many forms and documents and official-looking letters that all blurred together in my memory. David always explained them as routine financial management, insurance updates, or tax-related paperwork that didn't require my detailed attention. Yes, several times, but he always said they were just routine updates. Insurance forms, tax documents, things like that. "Bring everything you have," she said quietly. Something about the way Linda said that, quietly with a professional gravity that I hadn't heard from her before, made me understand that this conversation was more serious than even I had realized. This wasn't just about David being overly controlling or treating me like I couldn't handle my own affairs. This was potentially something much worse. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what I needed to do next. For the first time in almost 2 years, I had a plan that didn't involve asking David for permission or approval. I was going to find out exactly what had been done with my finances, and I was going to do it without telling anyone what I was planning. Monday morning, I drove to First National Bank downtown, where Robert and I had maintained our safety deposit box for 12 years. Mrs. Patterson, the bank manager, recognized me and led me to the vault. The box contained exactly what I'd hoped. The original deed to my house, clearly showing I owned it outright after Robert's death. No mortgage, no liens. Purchase price from 1987, $185,000. Current value, approximately $2.8 million. There were insurance policies, investment statements from 2021 to 2022, copies of our wills, and a folder labeled Current Financials, with bank statements from just before Robert's death. According to those documents, we had been very well off, comfortable enough that I should have been able to live indefinitely without financial worry. I still had the original deed. I made copies of everything and drove directly to Linda's office. She spread the documents across her conference table like evidence. "Margaret, based on what you've shown me, you should be financially independent," she said after 20 minutes. "Your house is worth nearly $3 million, and you had substantial assets when Robert died. The question is, where did that money go, and what papers did David have you sign?" "So I didn't blow through my money." "Unless you've been buying yachts, no. You've been financially manipulated." Linda explained that financial elder abuse was common, often perpetrated by adult children. It typically started with good intentions, but escalated to control and theft. David cutting off my mail access and the public humiliation were classic psychological manipulation tactics. "We need to be strategic," Linda said. "If David realizes you're investigating, he might destroy evidence. We need documentation before confronting him." Linda said we needed official copies of documents I might have signed, including power of attorney forms or real estate transfers. She wanted to run a credit check and request bank records for any accounts opened since Robert's death. "This will take a few weeks," she said. "Can you maintain normal contact with David? Act like nothing changed?" I thought about David's Thanksgiving performance. If he could orchestrate that convincingly, I could pretend everything was normal. "Yes." "Good. And Margaret, we're going to need to confront David publicly, with family present, so everyone understands what really happened. You're going to get your dignity back." Christmas dinner would be the perfect stage. Over the next 3 weeks, Linda worked methodically to build our case file. She requested certified copies of every document I had signed since Robert's death, ran a comprehensive credit check under my name, and obtained bank records for all accounts associated with my Social Security number. Her office contacted the county recorder, insurance companies, and my former employer to create a complete financial timeline over the past 2 years. What they found was both better and worse than I had expected. The good news was that most of my assets were still intact. David hadn't managed to steal everything yet. My investment accounts had been moved to different management companies and were being overseen by financial advisors I'd never met, but the principal amounts were largely untouched. My house was still in my name alone, despite David's claims at Thanksgiving about me selling it for turkey money. The concerning news was that David had systematically positioned himself to gain complete control. Linda spread the documents across her conference table like a prosecutor preparing for trial, walking me through what had been happening behind my back. "Margaret, look at this signature card from March 2023, she said, pointing to a bank document I remembered signing. "David told you this was to update beneficiary information, right?" "Yes, just a routine update." "This actually added him as co-signer on your primary checking account and gave him power of attorney over all transactions, much more extensive than he described." She showed me another document from August 2023, which David had presented as an insurance update. In reality, it was a change of address notification that redirected all financial correspondence to his address, cutting me off from my own account information. And this one, from October, Linda continued. David said this was a property tax form, correct? He said the county needed updated ownership information for tax assessment purposes. Margaret, this is a quitclaim deed preparation. If you had signed the final version of this document, you would have transferred half ownership of your house to David. As it stands, this is just the preliminary paperwork, but it shows he was planning to have you sign away part of your house. I stared at the document, reading my own signature at the bottom of a form I had never fully understood. David had handed it to me on a Wednesday afternoon, explained it quickly while I was trying to get dinner started, and asked me to sign it so he could handle the tax nonsense for me. I had trusted him completely. Every signature was mine and notarized properly. But the most disturbing discovery was what Linda called the acceleration timeline. David wasn't just controlling my finances, he was preparing to liquidate them. Bank records showed he had been researching reverse mortgage options for my house, investigating assisted living facilities in my area, and making inquiries about selling my investment portfolio for emergency cash needs. Based on the timeline of his activities, I think David was planning to move you into assisted living within the next few months, Linda said. Once you were out of your house, he could sell it, claim the proceeds were needed for your care, and essentially have access to everything you own. But I don't need assisted living. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. I know that, but David has been building a paper trail suggesting otherwise. Look at these medical appointment records he's been keeping. Every time you've mentioned feeling tired, every time you've forgotten someone's name or misplaced your keys, he's been documenting it as evidence of cognitive decline. Linda showed me a notebook that David had apparently been maintaining for over a year, a log of what he characterized as concerning incidents that demonstrated my inability to live independently. According to his records, I was frequently confused about dates, unable to manage simple financial transactions, and increasingly isolated from family and friends. None of it was true, but it was documented meticulously, and it would be convincing to anyone who didn't know me personally. This is actually sophisticated financial abuse, Linda said. David has been very careful to stay within legal boundaries while positioning himself to gain control over all your assets. The fact that he's been building a case for your incompetence suggests he was planning to have you declared unable to manage your own affairs. The realization hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't been helping me adjust to widowhood. He had been systematically dismantling my independence and preparing to take everything I owned. The weekly allowance, the mail forwarding, the public humiliation at Thanksgiving, it had all been part of a plan to make me seem incapable of managing my own life. While Linda gathered evidence, I focused on preparing my own countermoves. Following her instructions, I opened a new checking account at a different bank, one that David had never been associated with. I rented a post office box under my maiden name and began having important mail redirected there. I changed the locks on my house and had a security system installed, all under the pretext of being more careful about home safety as an elderly woman living alone. The new P.O. box would change everything. Most importantly, I started rebuilding relationships that David had systematically discouraged. I called my sister Carol and arranged to have lunch, despite David's previous warnings that she was too busy to spend time with me. I reached out to former colleagues from the library and made plans to attend a retirement party. I'd been avoiding because David said it would be too overwhelming for me. Every conversation confirmed what I was beginning to understand. David had been isolating me, not to protect me, but to control me. People were genuinely happy to hear from me and surprised that I had been so out of touch. Several friends mentioned that they had tried to call or visit, but David had told them I was going through a difficult adjustment and wasn't ready for social contact. Meanwhile, David continued his regular visits, completely unaware that his entire plan was unraveling. He still arrived every Wednesday with financial updates and household management advice, still maintained his patient, concerned demeanor, and still treated me like someone who needed constant guidance and supervision. During his visit, the second week of December, he mentioned that he had been looking into care options for me. Just as a precaution, he said, in case my health declined or I decided I didn't want to manage such a large house anymore. He had toured several assisted living communities and found one that he thought would be perfect for my needs: single-bedroom apartment, meal plans included, and staff available to help with medications and daily activities. I know it seems early to be thinking about this, Mom, but the waiting lists for good facilities are really long, he said, showing me brochures for Sunset Manor Assisted Living. I could put you on a list now, just in case you decide you want more support in a year or two. I nodded and looked through the brochures like I was genuinely considering his suggestion. The apartments looked pleasant enough, and the activities calendar included book clubs and exercise classes that might actually be enjoyable. But the monthly fees were enormous, nearly $8,000 per month for basic care and additional charges for any specialized services. How would I afford something like this? I asked. Well, that's what I've been working on, David said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used whenever he explained financial matters to me. We'd probably need to sell the house and use those proceeds to cover the first few years. The investment accounts could handle the rest, at least for a while. He had no idea what was coming. Christmas dinner was scheduled for December 22nd at David and Jennifer's house, the same dining room where I had been humiliated 4 weeks earlier. This time, I accepted the invitation enthusiastically. I'm so glad you're feeling up to it, Mom, David said when I confirmed attendance. Jennifer was worried you might be too tired for another big gathering. Not at all. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. And David, I'm bringing a guest, my cousin Linda, Robert's cousin, the estate attorney. Brief pause. Is there any particular reason she's coming? She's been helping me understand some financial paperwork. I thought it would be nice to include her. I hope that's not a problem. No, of course not. The more the merrier. But I could hear that forced cheerfulness in David's voice. Linda and I had rehearsed this carefully. She would arrive at 4 o'clock, 30 minutes after dinner started, carrying her briefcase and dressed professionally. Her entrance would signal that this was not a social visit. Let David dig his own hole, Linda had explained. Don't contradict him when he makes claims about your finances. Let him talk. The more specific he gets, the better when I present actual documentation. Christmas dinner started like Thanksgiving, with assigned seating and Jennifer's orchestration. This time, I was seated at the main table in a place of honor next to the window. The improved seating was clearly meant to demonstrate David's magnanimity. I played my part perfectly. I complimented Jennifer's table settings, praised the turkey, and participated in conversations like someone grateful to be included. I asked David thoughtful questions about work, expressed interest in his children's college plans. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Jennifer looked confused. Are we expecting someone else? I thought everyone was already here. Oh, that's Linda, I said, standing from the table. My cousin Linda Chen. I mentioned to David that I'd invited her. She's been helping me with some financial questions, and I thought it would be nice for her to join our celebration. David's face went very still. I watched him process this information, trying to calculate what Linda's presence might mean and what kind of financial questions I might have been asking her but there was nothing he could do now, with the entire family watching and Linda already at the door. She walked in like she owned the place. Linda entered the dining room with quiet authority that comes from years handling difficult family situation and complex legal disputes. She wore a tailored black suit, carried a leather briefcase, and projected the unmistakable aura of someone there to conduct business, not eat turkey, and make holiday small talk. She greeted everyone politely but formally, shook hands with David and Jennifer, declined their offer of food and wine, and asked for a few minutes to discuss important matters regarding my financial situation. "I know this is unusual timing," Linda said, addressing the room in her clear professional voice. "But Margaret asked me to review some documents over the past few weeks, and what I've discovered requires immediate family discussion. Everyone should understand the actual facts about Margaret's financial status and some concerns that have come to light." David immediately shifted into protective mode. "Linda, I appreciate your concern, but I've been managing Mom's finances carefully for 2 years. Everything is under control. I'm not sure what she's told you, but she sometimes gets confused about details." "Actually, David, that's exactly what we need to discuss." Linda opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder. "Margaret isn't confused at all. She's been systematically cut off from information about her own assets, and some paperwork she's signed is quite different from what was described to her." The room went completely quiet. Everyone stopped eating, stopped talking, and focused their attention on Linda and the folder she was holding. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," David said, his voice becoming more assertive. "Mom has been having trouble managing complex financial information since Dad died. I've been helping her simplify her life and make sure her bills get paid and her assets are protected. If she's been telling you that I'm somehow taking advantage of her, that's just not true." Linda looked at David with the kind of patient expression that attorneys use when they're about to destroy someone's credibility. "David, Margaret's house is currently valued at approximately $2.8 million, and she owns it outright with no mortgage. Her investment accounts, moved to different companies without her knowledge, still contain substantial assets. She has never been in financial trouble." "That's not accurate," David said quickly. "Mom doesn't understand the real estate market. The house isn't worth that much, and her expenses have been higher than income. I've been supplementing her living costs." "Actually, that's not true." Linda removed documents from her folder. "This is a certified copy of the original deed showing Margaret as sole owner. This is a recent county property assessment showing current market value. And these are bank records showing actual balances and transaction history." She spread the documents across Jennifer's dining table like evidence. $2.8 million, all in Margaret's name alone. I watched David's face as he realized what was happening. This wasn't a confused elderly woman making accusations based on misunderstood paperwork. This was a licensed attorney presenting documented evidence of financial manipulation, and she was doing it in front of the entire family with witnesses present. David picked up one of the documents and examined it closely, looking for some flaw or discrepancy that might discredit Linda's presentation. "I don't know where you got these papers, but they don't reflect the current situation. Mom signed documents transferring asset management to me for protection. She agreed because she was overwhelmed and needed help." Linda removed another set of documents from her folder. "Actually, David, here are copies of every document Margaret signed over the past 2 years, along with explanations of what you told her each was for, compared to what they actually accomplished. This March signature card, described as a beneficiary update, actually gave you power of attorney over all bank transactions. This October property form, said to be for tax assessment purposes, was preliminary paperwork for a quitclaim deed that would have transferred half her house ownership to you. These are certified copies, Cousins said calmly. David's confident demeanor began to crack. He looked around the table at the faces of family members who had been laughing at my expense just a month earlier, and I could see him trying to calculate whether anyone would believe his version of events over Linda's documented evidence. Look, I was trying to protect her, David said, his voice becoming defensive. Mom was making poor financial decisions, talking about large charity donations, getting confused about bills and basic things. I was trying to make sure she didn't lose everything. David, Margaret's only significant expenses over the past 2 years have been basic living costs, Linda replied. She hasn't made any large charitable donations or poor financial decisions. What she has done is sign documents you misrepresented, giving you increasing control while systematically cutting her off from financial information. Linda turned to address the rest of the family, who had been watching this exchange with growing understanding. This is financial elder abuse. It's a serious crime involving gaining trust of an elderly person, gradually assuming control of finances, isolating them from information and support, then liquidating assets for the abuser's benefit. The silence in the room was deafening. That's ridiculous, David said, but his voice lacked conviction. I would never steal from my mother. I've been trying to help her. Then you'll have no problem returning full control to Margaret and providing complete accounting of all transactions, Linda said. We can start with bank records showing where liquidated investment money went and discuss your assisted living and reverse mortgage research. David looked trapped. I could see him realizing that Linda had far more information than he had expected, and that his carefully constructed narrative about protecting a confused elderly woman was falling apart in front of everyone who had believed him. The silence that followed Linda's final statement stretched for seconds. I could see family members processing what they had witnessed, complete dismantling of the story they had believed for 2 years, backed by legal documentation no one could argue with. My sister Carol spoke first. Margaret, I had no idea. When David told us you were having financial trouble, when he said you needed help managing money, I should have asked more questions. You couldn't have known. David was very convincing. But I could see guilt and shame on Carol's face. She had accepted David's version without question, participated in Thanksgiving dinner humiliation, avoided calling me because she believed I was too confused. David's college roommate and wife exchanged uncomfortable glances and began gathering coats. We should probably head home, the roommate said, standing abruptly. Early day tomorrow. Us too, said Jennifer's colleague, jumping from her chair. Thank you for dinner, Jennifer. Margaret, wonderful to finally meet you properly. Half the family suddenly remembered urgent errands. Within 10 minutes, the room cleared except immediate family, David, Jennifer, their children, Carol and her husband, Linda and me. People who had laughed at my expense, who had nodded knowingly when David described my poor decisions, were suddenly nowhere to be found. The ones who stayed were the ones who couldn't easily escape, and the ones who were beginning to understand the full scope of what had been happening. Jennifer, who had orchestrated the seating arrangements at both Thanksgiving and Christmas to support David's narrative about my declining competence, was now staring at the legal documents spread across her dining table like they were evidence of a crime, which, according to Linda, they were. David, Jennifer said quietly, what is she talking about? What gambling debts? I watched David's face change as he realized that Linda had mentioned something he hadn't expected her to know about. Throughout this entire confrontation, he had been trying to maintain the fiction that he was a devoted son protecting his mother from her own poor judgment. But Linda had just revealed that she knew about aspects of his life that he had kept hidden from everyone, including his wife. "I don't know what she's referring to," David said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier. "Mom, I think you've been listening to too many stories. Linda doesn't know anything about our family situation." Linda looked at David with the expression of someone who was about to reveal information that would destroy the last remnants of his credibility. "Actually, David, financial elder abuse cases typically involve perpetrators under financial pressure," she said. "So we investigate the financial situation of whoever gained control. In your case, that revealed interesting information." She opened her briefcase and removed another folder. "These are credit reports showing your financial activity. You owe approximately $47,000 in credit card debt across 7 accounts. You have a second mortgage from 18 months ago. You borrowed $15,000 against retirement in March. And these show online gambling losses totaling over $23,000 in 2 years. Jennifer's face went white. "David, what is she talking about? What gambling sites? What second mortgage?" David looked like a trapped animal. The confident, protective son who had been managing his confused mother's finances had been replaced by a man whose own financial desperation was now laid bare in front of his family. "Jennifer, I can explain this. Yes, I've had financial setbacks, made mistakes with online poker, but everything with Mom's money was to protect her assets." "But you were planning to steal," Linda said. "The assisted living research, reverse mortgage applications, quitclaim deed paperwork, preparation for gaining complete control, and liquidating her assets to cover your debts. Were you planning to put your mother in assisted living to sell her house and take the money?" Jennifer asked. "It's not that simple. Mom is getting older, needs support. The house is too big. Moving her would have been better for everyone." "David, assisted living costs $8,000 monthly," Linda said. "Margaret's house proceeds would last 30 years. But her life expectancy is 15 to 20 years. Where were you planning to spend the other $1.4 million? The gambling debts explained everything. David's entire scheme suddenly made perfect sense. He wasn't a devoted son helping his mother manage her finances. He was a desperate gambler who had accumulated massive debts and seen his mother's substantial assets as a solution to his problems. The mail forwarding, the bank account control, the psychological manipulation, the public humiliation, all of it had been designed to position him to liquidate my assets and use the proceeds to cover his gambling losses and debt payments. Jennifer was staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. "You told me your mother was broke. You said she was burning through money. Couldn't afford her lifestyle. You said we were helping by managing her finances. You said the Thanksgiving seating was because she was embarrassed. I was trying to protect everyone. Yes, I have debts, made bad decisions, but I would never have stolen from Mom." A solution involving lying to your wife, manipulating your mother, and stealing $3 million in assets, Linda said. "This is criminal financial elder abuse." Carol finally spoke. "Margaret, what do you want to do? Press charges? Call police?" I looked around the table, David desperate and exposed, Jennifer shocked by her husband's lies, their children processing that their father had been abusing their grandmother. For the first time, I had real choices. Financial independence back, dignity restored, family's attention and respect. David's power over me was completely broken, but I had to decide what justice looked like, and whether destroying David completely would make me feel better, or just create more damage for people I still cared about. I took a long breath and looked directly at David. I'm not going to press criminal charges, but I am going to establish clear boundaries about how our family operates going forward. The relief on David's face was obvious, but I held up my hand before he could speak. Linda, I want you to prepare paperwork to return complete financial control to me. Every account, every authorization David has been managing transfers back to my name only. I want my mail delivery restored, new account numbers, new passwords. I want a complete financial audit showing where every dollar has been for 2 years. Additionally, I want David to provide written accounting of every penny spent from my accounts. If any of my money covered his gambling debts, I expect full restitution within 6 months. Mom, that's fair. I can do that. I never meant for things to get so complicated. David, you're not speaking to me as someone who controls my life anymore. You're speaking to me as someone who will decide whether you remain part of this family. I want a formal letter of apology acknowledging what you did. I want copies sent to every family member present at Thanksgiving, explaining that your characterization of my financial situation was false. I also want you to understand that my relationship with you will be contingent on your behavior. I'm willing to maintain contact and include you in family gatherings, but only if you treat me with the respect any adult deserves. I will not tolerate being managed, controlled, or talked down to. David nodded, looking genuinely chastened. I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I'm also not pretending that what happened was acceptable. If you want to rebuild trust, you'll need to demonstrate that you understand the difference between supporting someone and controlling them. I stood up and gathered my purse. Linda, thank you for everything. Please send me the paperwork to review. Of course, Margaret. I'll have everything ready by the end of the week. I looked around the dining room one more time, the same room where I had been seated by the garbage can 4 weeks earlier. Today, that same room had become where I reclaimed my dignity and established my independence. I'll be hosting Easter dinner at my house this year. Everyone is welcome, but there will be no assigned seating, no commentary about financial situations, and no tolerance for disrespectful behavior. Christmas invitations would require respect first. 6 months later, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my bank statement spread in front of me, my statements delivered to my address. David had kept every promise. The written apology went to everyone who laughed that night. The audit came back clean, except for $23,000 he'd used to plug his debts, and he repaid it in full. Linda replaced every account number, every password, every authorization. My mail came to me again, not through someone else's hands. Easter at my house felt simple and honest. No assigned seats, no speeches, no poor mom stories. David washed dishes quietly and asked before he offered help. I learned this. Care respects your clarity. Control needs your confusion. If you've ever felt small at your own table, check your papers, ask one trusted professional, and speak up. If this hit home, tell me in the comments, and share this story with someone who needs it.